The rotors that suggested that Lucy Letby might be there each time unexpected collapses or unexpected deaths were happening. And let's remember that deaths were not unusual on the neonatal unit. There were about four a year, but this rose to 13 in 2015 and 2016.
Farinaz is the aunt of Zara Aline, who was murdered in 2022. Her killer, Jordan McSweeney, also didn't attend his sentencing. Well, Farinaz told me about what she thought about Letby not going to court.
I feel for the families whose babies she murdered that will not get a chance to see her face her sentencing, will not get that moment in just a brief moment of retribution. It's not full, but to see her in court and to stand and to have a moment perhaps where they can see that she is part of her punishment. And so I feel sad for those families that also may want to address her in their victim impact statements. And I think to have that moment to address that person that's destroyed your life certainly is so important to the process of justice and so important to the victims themselves in their own process of dealing with their trauma. But I think it's much more than that. I know that we've been talking about Face the Family. I think that Letby has to face justice and she has to face society. And I think we don't have to drag in the criminal. I think we can persuade them. There are certain other ways of getting them into the courtroom so they face justice. And that would be to extend minimum tariffs, or to refuse a tariff, or to refuse parole, or to refuse certain privileges in prison. I think if we don't do this, this will continue as a trend. And I think what it does when an offender doesn't appear in the courtroom, it's another way of the offender spitting in the face of the law, but also of the victims and taking a bit of power.
You were deprived of that moment, having written a victim impact statement that you wanted Jordan McSweeney to hear.
Yes.
Giving that statement when you're not being able to deliver it to the person that you've written it to, what impact does that have?
Well, it just felt farcical to read our victim impact statements because it's written for him. It's written to him. As a family, we still want to face him. Maybe want is the wrong word, but we feel entitled to face him and tell him what impact he has had on our family. And we would want to be able to do that. That's what you do. It's very human. It's a very basic human need. Somebody's hurt you, you tell them this is what you did. And also, that person has an opportunity then to feel remorse, to feel guilty. So I think it just seems very strange not to have that interaction.
For the victims here who it sounds like today won't get that moment that you've talked about,
Yes.
what kind of alternatives do you think would even merit something for the families if they did sort of live stream the hearing into the cell? Is that enough?
Nothing will ever be good, will be enough, will it? Nothing is enough. But I think that is a way that the live streaming is in the cell, that the person is forced to hear the proceeds in the courtroom. And also a camera can be put on them. If the families want to see her face whilst she hears the sentencing while she's in a cell, why not? Why not do something like that? It's part of hearing your sentencing is actually also a crime deterrent. People have asked me, and I've been reading online, people say, well, what difference does it make if somebody's going to be in prison all their lives, that they stand in the courtroom? Why fight for this? It's really important because I think it does act as a crime deterrent. Having to face a judge and to be told what you've done, even if you're alone in the room, in a cell, it sends a message, doesn't it, to other criminals out there. This is what would happen.
The challenge with someone like Lucy Letby is how there seems to be no clarity at all on what motivated her to do this. And we've got photographs of her, you know, after she's murdered a baby, then going out and celebrating at a hen party. Some might say even hearing victim statements from the parents of the babies that she murdered. Actually, for someone like her, it's not going to have any effect at all. She must be aware of the trauma that she's caused, and it had no bearing on her behaviour because she continued to behave in such an abhorrent, monstrous way.
We will never know, but even psychopaths can have a moment of humanity. Who knows, in that moment, maybe she will feel remorse when she hears her sentencing, or maybe she won't. But we don't stop a justice process just because the criminal doesn't connect. Justice still has to be seen to be done, doesn't it?
That was Farah Naz, the aunt of Zara Alina, who was murdered in 2022. Well, there are a couple of other issues we want to talk about this morning, as well as the sentencing. The blame game between doctors and management over the case, and also concerns that Letby could have killed many more babies. The Times' Tom Witherow has been looking at that. Tom, good morning.
Good morning.
Can we just start with what we're expecting today in terms of sentencing?
Yes, absolutely. So, as you've heard, Lucy Letby is unlikely to attend the court today as Chester Crown Court, as the judge passes sentence. We are expecting a whole life term, which means that Lucy Letby will be one of very few female killers in this country to get a life means life sentence. So that means going to jail, no opportunity for parole, and spending the rest of her life, she's 33 now, behind bars.
We know as well that police are reviewing about 4,000 admissions to neonatal units. They described it as the footprint at which that Lucy Letby had worked in different hospitals. And there are real concerns that it might be up to 30 more victims.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're looking at the time that she spent in hospitals in the northwest. So that's the Countess of Chester Hospital and Liverpool Women's Hospital. Um, all of the neonatal admissions in that time between around 2011 and 2016. And they've already identified a possible 30 unexplained collapses in that second unit in the Countess of Chester, which are now being investigated. That was reported by The Guardian last night.
And of course, there's so many questions and debates right now as to exactly what process should be taken to make sure that things like this don't happen again. Much sort of focused on why colleagues and managers didn't feel like they had their voices heard. What kind of allegations are we hearing about people who said, I wasn't listened to?
Absolutely. So last week we heard very strong testimony in interviews from two of the senior paediatricians on the Countess of Chester neonatal unit. They said that they had started looking into the apparent, the rotas that suggested that Lucy Letby might be there each time unexpected collapses or unexpected deaths were happening. And let's remember that deaths were not unusual on the neonatal unit. There were about 4 a year, but this rose to 13 in 2015 and 2016. They say that they made repeated approaches to various managers, including senior nursing staff, the medical director, and eventually attempts via the board to get the police to come in. But they were rebuffed, and it was actually 2 years between the start of Letby's killing spree and the police coming in to investigate. But what we've heard yesterday, and is in the Times report today, is that two of the senior staff, that is Karen Moore and Ian Harvey, the medical director, have hit back and said, actually, the doctors didn't come to us with as much evidence as they say they are now, and that it was not until the summer of 2016, so that is almost towards the end of the killing spree, as was laid before the court in the recent trial, and therefore, this really explains why the public inquiry is so important. Even at this time, even after 8 months of hearing the evidence in court, there is still disputed evidence about how this happened, how it might have been stopped, and obviously for the public and the people listening today, how it could be stopped in trusts in future.
Tom, thank you so much for your sort of extensive analysis and reporting on this case. Tom Witherow from The Times, and there's lots more to read about that on the front page of the paper today.